So, yeah, for Thursday evening, it's really full here. Yeah. So, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce briefly Fabio Portela Almeida, yeah, from Brazil. I met him that way that he sent me a paper, and I didn't know who that was, but it was on evolutionary theory. It was a 100-page essay that was published in Cardoso Law Review, and then it was talked before the holiday, and I took it with me to the holiday, and then I read it and found that it came very, very close to the things I'm doing, yeah, and then I knew already that he was from Brasilia, and then I asked my friends in Brasilia, Marcelo, yeah, and then he said, yeah, this is my student, yeah, and and he studied at the University of Brasilia and got his doctorate degree in 2016 with that book, the book version of the essay that was already a dissertation, yeah, or long enough for that. In 2000, master's degree in law and philosophy. Yeah, so it was. He studied basically law, yeah, and sociology, yeah, and philosophy also, yeah, and biology, and he was a long time in the US, and I think at Harvard he studied biology, yeah. So only for reasons of evolutionary, to be more come more into evolutionary theory. Yeah. So in 2012 he was awarded the best philosophy master's dissertation prize from the Brazilian National Association of Postgraduate Studies in Philosophy. In the moment he is working as a clerk to the Superior Labor Court, das ist Deutschlands Bundesarbeitsgericht, and does researching in that field all time in more or less in the same field, yeah, which is anyway broad enough, yeah. And they were so nice to give him a leave, full pay, that he could go for 3 months, that he could go with his entire position to ISIS, yeah, and join our classes, and we make together a seminar, yeah, and our research, and whatever, yeah, our meetings, and so, yeah. So this is we are thankful, very thankful for that, and that's he's visiting research fellow with ISIS, but that we know already.
So first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Hall for inviting me to ICES, Maria, Schwab, Monica Agnella, and my colleague Laura Koenig for being so warm to me here, and I feel so good and great to be here, and I'm really grateful for everything you have been doing for me during these few weeks that I'm staying here. So I'm not a specialist in Brexit, but I'm quite a specialist on my framework, so I think that I have some ideas that can contribute to understanding Brexit. And I planned my talk in three topics. The first of all, is a little bit of evolutionary theory and how it can we can develop a framework to understand Brexit and the evolution of the European Union as what I call an evolutionary individual, in the sense of Peter Godfrey Godfrey-Smith, which is a scientist that I will refer to in a few moments. And then I will address Brexit from this evolutionary perspective. So basically my claims are the following in this talk. First, the European Union is a cooperative project which resulted from a multi-level evolutionary process, which I will define later on. And second, we can understand Brexit as an outcome of multi-level evolution. So, but first we need to grasp into the evolutionary theory of how cooperation emerges in an evolutionary background. And I begin with the most evolutionary of the scientists, which is Darwin. And his idea, he has this idea, even in The Descent of Man, in which he tries to explain human evolution, and he grasps on this idea, which may be seen as the beginning of a multi-level selection theory of the evolution of cooperation. Darwin says, there can be no doubt that the tribe, including many members who are always ready to give aid to each other and to sacrifice themselves for the common good, would be victorious over other tribes. And this would be natural selection. So basically we are talking about two levels here. There's selection acting on individuals, the members of the tribe, and they are being selected because they are good people. They're people who sacrifice themselves over the tribe in order to achieve the common good of the tribe. And on the second level, you have the tribes as an evolutionary entity on its own. And these tribes could combat other tribes, and then the most successful tribes would be selected over the less stronger ones. And so there's in some sense, Darwin already had some ideas on multi-level selection, but this theory was developed later on, basically since the 70s. So the emergence of cooperation is a major evolutionary issue. If we look at nature, we see that even a cell is full of organelles, and they are cooperating with each other in order to back the autonomy of the cell. We can see that in bees, the relationship between a shark and the hammerfish, the way that vampire bats share food with other vampire bats, how monkeys cooperate, and how, obviously, we cooperate in our environments. But how can this be explained? And first of all, we must take into account what biology says, how biology defines cooperation. Basically, cooperation is a situation in which there are at least two agents who engage in mutually beneficial behavior, although each one of them would be better off if they acted in a selfish way. So we have a free riding problem here, because the two agents have incentives to not engage in a cooperative, altruistic way towards each other. But nevertheless, cooperation emerges out in this situation. How can biology explain this? Basically, two theories have been proposed in the domain of biology, which is, the first of which is kin selection, which explains the emergence of cooperation if individuals share a high percentage of their genes. So if I share 90% of my genes with, I don't know, my sister, my brother, then it makes sense from a biological perspective to cooperate with her or with him, because 90% of my genes will be spread through the next generation. So it makes sense from a biological perspective to help other people that share a high enough percentage of my genes, because my genes will be spread through the other generation, if not 100%, 90%, 70%, or so on. This kind of explanation helps us understand the evolution of cooperation inside a cell. For instance, all the cells in our body share 100% of their genes with the other cells. So they have almost no incentive to fight between themselves over a resource, because it wouldn't make sense for this kind of competition. The same happens in a beehive, in a community of ants, and so on. And the second solution is reciprocal altruism, which is a way that biologists attempted to explain the emergence of cooperation in a community setting where there is no shared genetics. So why does a shark engage in mutualistic altruistic behavior with a fish hammer, for instance? Why does this happen? And this, according to this theory, you don't need to have genetic relatedness if if the two agents interact over an indefinite amount of time, and there is an increasing odd that the altruistic behavior will be reciprocated in the future. So I give you something today, but then I hope that in 3 months, if I need help, you will help me. So this is the kind of behavior that is explained through reciprocal altruism. And another condition is that free riders must be punished. So if I cooperate with you, and I expect that you will help me when I need, and then you don't help me when I need, then you get punished. So if this kind of punishment exists, then cooperation might emerge in this kind of background. But obviously this kind of sociobiological solutions are quite limited because kin selection demands the degree of genetic relatedness that we can't count on in human societies. And reciprocal altruism can explain cooperation, but only in small scale societies. Why is that? Because the marginal costs of riding reduces when societies are much bigger. For instance, if I engage with a criminal and and he free rides over me in our relationship, I can punish him. But he can, in a large society, the odds that we both will meet again are progressively lower, so he can exploit other people and never get punished. So you need to have other kinds of social structures to punish free riders, not in a way that doesn't depend on individual memory. Basically, these two kinds of mechanisms have explained some functions in our social psychology, such as parental care, nepotism, which are based on kin selection, and reciprocal altruism can explain friendship, moralistic punishment, trust, guilty, and a sense of fairness. This is the standard sociobiological theory. But this theory is based on the selection of a social psychology based only on genetics. So our genetics cause our social psychology, and our social psychology causes the evolution of societies and culture. But since the 70s and 80s, some theories have been developed based on a different account of human nature. And these theories take into account that evolution occurs in multi-level layers of evolutionary ontology. And these theories have developed quite a robust theory of cooperation. There are lots of multi-level selection theories, but I rely mostly on these two, which are gene culture coevolution and the approach based on transitions in Darwinian populations. I will explain what we need to address the evolution of European Union and Brexit, so don't mind about mathematics or stuff like that. Well, first of all, we must understand what is a Darwinian individual. According to the textbook definition of evolution, natural selection will take place in any population, so you need a population. Natural selection won't work upon one individual, but in a population of individuals, in which there is variation, heredity, and differences in reproductive success. And in this population, any member that composes this population, we call him a Darwinian individual. According to Peter Godfrey-Smith, things are not that clear when we get to real biology. So, in nature you have many kinds of different organisms and animals and plants, and not always these organisms fit to the standard theory. And he proposed that we understand evolution in such a way that there are some paradigmatic cases in which you can agree that, okay, evolution is occurring here, this fits the Darwinian standard definition, and there are other cases that they don't fit quite well, but they fit somehow those parameters of Darwinian evolution. And he proposed that instead of talking about 3 parameters, we think in a 6-dimensional space through which each organism can score highly or lower in each of these parameters. So we can talk about heredity, variation, fitness, continuity, integration, and reproductive specialization. This is the kind of chart that he proposed. As you can see, there are lots of organisms here, and they are placed within different spaces in this three-dimensional chart. And according to him, one Darwinian entity, a simpler organism, can evolve into a more complex one if he increasingly satisfies these parameters. So over the course of evolution, when organisms are becoming ever and ever more complex, they start to score higher on those parameters. And in the course of evolution, Darwinian populations become nested within other Darwinian populations. So when a group of cells join themselves and form a multicellular organism, and then they start to make a more complex organism, entity, inside this entity there are the cells. So you have 2 levels here, the level of an entity, an animal, a cat for instance, and the level of the individual cells, which are based on another layer of individuals. And we can never forget that there is an intrinsic conflict between one level and the other. So in some situations, the cells can fight against the organism, as it happens, for instance, in cancer, which is precisely a situation when the cells start to reproduce more and more, and they disrupt the organic stability of the whole. And also, according to Peter Godfrey-Smith, when this occurs, when there is a transition from a simpler being to a more complex one, there occurs the Darwinization of lower level populations. So natural selection begins to lose force at the level of the lower entities and starts to act in a stronger way in the level of the whole. Is it clear? Okay. So we could think about a Russian doll model in which there are many layers inside an organism, and natural selection is acting on each of these layers. So from genes, cells, to the whole organism, and to maybe a group of individuals. This is my contribution. I'm working, the novelty of my work is exactly into applying this framework to understand the evolution of human societies. So, let me give some examples. So, according to his chart, we have this marginal case where the entity scores low in each of those parameters. And here you get the paradigmatic case where the entity satisfies all the parameters set by Godfrey-Smith. So any entity can occupy different spaces in this chart. We could say, for instance, that a buffalo herd is a marginal case because a buffalo, when it reproduces, it's not the whole herd that reproduces, it's just a buffalo. So you don't have reproduction of the whole group, but reproduction of a part of the group. So I won't delve into the details, it's just to understand the concept. Then you have a sponge that scores high in the inheritance field, but low in the internal complexity, and so on. And then you have a tree, and maybe a cat, which could be understood as a paradigmatic case of Darwinian individual. Okay, but how do these transitions happen between one layer to the other? In order to understand this, we need to grasp into other researchers, John Maynard Smith and Eörs Szathmáry, and I never know how to say the name of this guy, who argue that evolutionary transitions occur when higher level entities solve the free rider problem of the lower level entities. So that same problem we have seen in the beginning of the talk also is trying to be solved here. And according to them, there are three main mechanisms through which these transitions between low level and higher level entities happen. So first of all, kin selection, again, which suppresses free riding by granting that low level entities share the same degree of relatedness. Then we have central control, when the full organization of the higher level entity can maintain its own organization through the existence of centralized mechanisms that keep the integrity of the low-level entities. And then you have path dependence. Over time, the symbiosis between low-level and higher-level becomes so strong that the evolution becomes more improbable. So they become, it's such a mutually beneficial relationship that it becomes improbable that things will go back and privilege lower levels over the higher levels. But why does this happen? Basically because of two major advantages of being more complex, which are the division of labor between specialized units within the whole and the larger entity, and new ways of information transmission. For instance, RNA evolved into DNA, and later on human societies developed language as a way to transmit information, and so on. Here basically are all the transitions that this by Eörs Szathmáry is exemplifying the domain of biology, and the last one is exactly the emergence of societies with natural language as a major example of a huge transition in our biological setting. So this is what I call transitions in individuality. We have also other kinds of multi-level selection theory, which highlights the coevolution between our genetics and culture as a way to explain the evolution of human societies. According to these two researchers, Peter Richerson and Robert Boyd, our human social psychology co-evolved with culture in the last 1,800,000 years. And in this process, language evolved as a major tool, leading to the emergence of culture as a second evolutionary system alongside with the genetic one. So things get a bit more complex than the sociobiological model, because here you have society and culture acting as a major evolutionary cause of the evolution of our genetics, and through this process, culture becomes a cause of our social psychology. So culture becomes part of the environment that selected our psychology. And as a result of this process, we, over the layers that sociobiology had already explained alongside the lines of kin selection and reciprocal altruism, this theory claims that we also developed the tribal social psychology, in which we favor cooperation in groups with other members of our community, some suspicion against outsiders, and some egalitarianism within our groups. And adopting this kind of explanation, the psychologist Jonathan Haidt developed what he calls a moral foundation theory, which claims that these tribal social instincts led to a variation in the moral standards of mankind alongside 6 dimensions: the dimension of care, how we protect others from harm; the dimension of fairness, how we develop our intuitions about what's wrong or right; the dimension of loyalty, which is moral action based on shared cultural values and norms; the dimension of authority, how we respect the social hierarchy; purity, which drives us against certain pathogens; and liberty, the value that people should be freed from external control. I'm gonna back to Brexit from this. I know that things might seem so far from that, but I'm gonna get into that. Just be a bit patient. So, according to the model I developed based on these two theories, we have to split culture from social structure, and I got lots of sociology here to back this claim. And we must add another layer that social structure also affects our social psychology, and that there is a kind of cultural selection here I get from Cavalli Sforza and other Donald Campbell and other researchers. There is also social selection, so the social structure selects the way our culture evolves and how the social roles that are performed by people also affect cultural selection and cultural evolution. And also this social selection I bring from the work by the sociologist W.G. Runciman. And I claim that we should also talk about structural selection, which would be the external selection of social structures, for instance, based on the relationship between one country and the other. Maybe some structures are selected instead of others, and also the relationship between one country and, for instance, international law. And finally, we get to the European Union. So my attempt here is to use the framework I just explained to understand the European Union as an evolutionary individual. And from the beginning, I claim that cooperation is a foundation for the emergence of complex individuals and societies. With this assumption, we can devise the following question. How can this framework explain the emergence of complex democratic societies? And basically, we must take into account processes that are happening in these four layers. In our social psychology, in our culture, in our social level, and at the societal level. Basically, in my PhD thesis, I used the Godfrey-Smith framework to explain how human societies evolved from small kin groups to large cooperative groups, from those that existed in the Pleistocene, to hierarchical tribes such as the ones that predated ancient empires, for instance, and then stratified societies such as Roman society or medieval society, or, well, the pre-modern society if we use Luhmann or Parsons' explanation. And then we would get a paradigmatic case of Darwinian evolution, which I call constitutional societies. And why is that? Why are constitutions so important that they would lead human societies to achieve such a degree of Darwinian, to become a Darwinian paradigmatic case of evolution? First of all, I claim that constitutions play a different role in each of those layers of human societal evolution. First of all, from the standpoint of human psychology, constitutions did Darwinize, so they help individuals interact in a more cooperative fashion by being consistent with egalitarian biases of our tribal social psychology through the functional inclusion of citizens by the means of fundamental rights. At the standpoint of culture, constitutions provide a normative symbolic system that legitimizes political power in a culturally pluralistic society. Wow. At the social level, constitutions protect the functional differentiation of the social system by assigning fundamental rights to social organizations performing different systemic operations. And at the societal level, constitutions define the boundaries of the system and structures functional differentiation in a regional level. So the Brazilian constitution structures how functional differentiation will occur at the level of in Brazilian society. The EU institutions will organize how a functional operation will occur at the level of the European level, for instance, something like this that I'm talking about. So constitutions provide, well, there's a mistake there. The full operational closure of complex societies as autonomous evolutionary individuals. And then comes the question, can the European Union be described by this framework? And they claim that yes, we can. At first, we should take into account evolution, the evolutionary path of the European Union through the beginning, when it was the European Coal and Steel Community, when integration between the European level and the national state level was quite low, and especially based on partial economic and very little political integration. So the means of a common market for coal and steel, basically that. But there was a beginning the beginning of a process of de-Darwinization of the national state. So we could say that when you are a national state without a higher entity, you have the free rider dilemma going on. So each state has a better result if it only aims at achieving their self-interested results. But with the evolution of the European Union, later on through the means of the European Economic Community, integration gets in a higher step, and there's further de-Darwinization of parts through the means of the creation of a common market and the customs union. So the tightening between the higher level and the lower level becomes, the ties become tighter, and there is more mutual interdependence between all the parts involved. And of course, there is an increasing power of novel institutions such as the Council, the Commission, the European Parliament, and so on. And finally, we get to the European Union, which furthers economic, social, and political integration by creating a huge set of institutions, which leads to more de-Darwinization of parts, countries, and citizens. That for the first time you take citizens into account in this model through economic, social, legal, and political integration. And the European Union institutionalizes central control through a bureaucratic political structure, through a hybrid system of supranational and intergovernmental decision-making processes. And of course, there's an increasing influence of European level institutions over the national states, like the European Council, the European Central Bank, and so on. And also we can talk here of an increasing legal regulation of social systemic operations through multi-level governance. Using the framework I developed earlier, we can say that the three mechanisms stated by Szathmáry and Eörs Smith are present here. First of all, kin selection. Of course, not genetic kin selection, but a social kin selection. In which terms? That the free riding between states is constrained by enforcing political, economic, and social interdependence between national states, businesses, universities, and other social organizations, and individual citizens. And this point I got from a really good Monica's paper, through the wide recognition of human rights. So when individuals can act throughout the institutions to have their rights granted, then we can say that they are being integrated within the system and they are seen as equal citizens. So through the means of legal equality, we have something similar as genetic equality in the later former biological sense of the meaning. Second, the EU achieves part of a central control through the development of political and legal set of institutions which improve integrity and facilitates the supervision and propose policies to reduce imbalances between distinct regions. And also we have path dependence in the sense that the long-standing interaction between countries in this framework creates the conditions of mutual interdependence. And here I got part of Bronkhorst's concept of constraint, evolutionary constraint, between national states, since each state's interest becomes aligned with the interests of the Union. From the standpoint of each of the ontological layers that we had taken into account, we can say that the EU enhanced individual level cooperation by de-Darwinizing the bottom level interactions through which are made consistent with our egalitarian biases through the functional inclusion of citizens, through the idea again of human rights. Also, the structure of the European Union creates a normative symbolic system based on a common currency, a flag, an anthem, and even the Europe Day, which helps create a common culture. Of course, it's a more formal culture than the national culture, but nonetheless a culture that legitimizes political power in a culturally and nationally pluralistic society. At the social level, there is a protection of functional differentiation through the assignment of fundamental rights to social organizations, such as through the means of the four freedoms of the EU, which perform different systemic operations. And at the societal level, we can say that the institutions of the European Union define the boundaries of the system and structure functional differentiation at the European level. And then finally, we got Brexit. How can we understand Brexit in this framework? First of all, we can say that the United Kingdom, and here I borrow the term, the description by Stefan Auer, was always a reluctant member of the Union. For instance, in 1957, the UK did not sign the Treaty of Rome, and so wasn't a member of the European Economic Community until 73, so almost 16 years after the creation of the European Economic Community that England became part of that. And in 75, there was a first referendum on about the United Kingdom membership in EEC, and precisely about the membership of England inside the European Union at that time. So 2 years after its first entrance in the EEC, it already had a referendum. And even after the 73 EEC membership, there was a struggle, a political struggle within England that between Conservative and Labour, the Tories and Labour, which argued for another referendum in the future precisely about the membership inside the EEC and later on in the European Union. In the 80s, during the government of Margaret Thatcher, there was high skepticism inside English society against the formation of a European superstate. And in the 90s, England opposed the adoption of a single currency, so it only adopted euro really later on in history. And from the 90s onwards, there was an increase in popular support for a new referendum. And the situation got to such a high level of support for a new referendum that in the 2015 general election, all the three mainstream political parties offered a program to the electorate in which a new referendum was considered a major objective to be achieved. So probably it was an inevitable political outcome since the 70s that we would have a referendum in Britain. But I claim that from a sociological perspective, we can see that there was an incomplete structural coupling between the UK and the European Union from the standpoint of constitutional theory, insofar as parliamentary sovereignty, being a paramount principle in British constitutionalism, conflicts with the structure of European Union. And then you might ask me, okay, but other countries were organized in a sovereign way, and why did this happen, especially in the British case? Maybe it's because they have a stronger idea of parliamentary sovereignty than other countries. And the fact that they don't have a formal constitution makes harder for the system to accept this kind of coupling with higher level institutions. Okay, this is maybe a tentative hypothesis. It's hard to back this hypothesis with other arguments, but I think that there is something in the idea of an informal constitution and the lack of institutional possibilities of changing this concept of sovereignty. And this led to a low Darwinization of United Kingdom national institutions, which made economic interest ties more predominant over political and social joint interests, and especially as a result of the EU Treaty having Article 50, this made an open venue for a top-down approach in which Brexit was a possibility. And we could see Brexit as a free-riding venue in the sense that even today the negotiations between Great Britain and the European Union attempt to retain the economic benefits of being a privileged partner of the European Union while avoiding the cost of membership. So this is specifically a case of free riding in the sense that you try to reap the benefits and not pay the costs of cooperation. So even today we're seeing this kind of situation emerging. From the standpoint of the social level, we could say that Brexit had also a fracture in certain imbalances in British social structure, in the sense that increasing inequality and social division based on education, income, and cultural background led to the delegitimization of the European Union, and this has been studied a lot when the demographic factors of the electors who voted in Brexit are taken into account, and they split the population between youngers and the elder, the higher education classes and the less educated, those who have a higher income and those who are retired, unemployed, or perform low-income jobs. So when you split the population this way, it makes sense that this social division inside British society has some role in explaining Brexit. From the standpoint of psychological biases, or the psychological level, there's a really interesting study by Craig Harper and Todd Hope, who used Jonathan Haidt's hypothesis of moral foundations theory to provide a framework to understand if we could forecast how voters would vote for remain or for leave the European Union based on moral claims. So you remember those moral foundations theory, which says that we have 6 dimensions of morality: care, fairness, liberty, authority, loyalty, and so on. So they created a model, these researchers created a model to test if any one of those moral foundations would prevail in forecasting which side would win. And they found that higher endorsement of the care foundation predicted an intent to vote remain, while higher endorsement of the liberty foundation significantly predicted an intent to vote leave. So people more concerned with freedom would vote leave, and people more concerned with taking care of the others, so maybe through the means of a huge welfare state or social policies, they would vote remain. And another element, other elements suggested by our tribal social psychology hypothesis from Richerson and Boyd, maybe it would back the claims that nationalism also would play a role in Brexit, because the loyalty to a nation with well-defined values and cultural history can be much stronger to our social psychology than the loyalty to a more abstract entity such as the European Union. And also situations like unemployment, lower wages, and increasing inequality can trigger some psychological biases towards the fear and suspicion of foreigners through the means of the triggering of biases related to our sense of fairness and inequity aversion. In sum, so to summarize this analysis, we could say that at the level of social psychology, cultural and social factors involve social instincts to emphasize nationality and fear the loss of power to an abstract entity. From the standpoint of the cultural layer, we could say that the meaning and symbolic structure provided by the European Union was not strong enough to counterbalance the legitimation of long-standing British institutions. At the social level, we could say that social imbalances provoked by increasing inequality and social divisions based on education, income, and cultural background had a major role in the process, and that the societal level, it's possible that the continuous conflict over sovereignty between British constitutional institutions and the acceptance of EU's authority might have led to a low degree of de-Darwinization from the United Kingdom. And I would risk saying that this framework could suggest some ways to prevent something like Brexit to happen again. And in this sense, I would say that from the standpoint of social psychology, the EU could improve legitimation procedures through more representative and inclusive structures and positive contact with foreigners, especially in the countryside of the countries where the majority of conservative forces usually have more influence. From the standpoint of culture, the symbolic structure provided by the European Union could be enhanced. Maybe over time, the future generations can develop this sense of European membership. And here I borrow this idea from John Rawls, who says that, okay, in the beginning of constitutional societies, we had an environment where people respected the constitution not because they agreed with it, but because they feared that other groups could take the power and use their power to impose sanctions and to endanger their own position. But over the course of generations, people became used to the sense that, okay, the constitution is a good thing, we share these constitutional values, and so the constitution can regulate the way we live. At the social level, maybe more welfare institutions at the level of the European Union could be created to fight increasing inequality and prevent social divisions. And at the societal level, I think that Article 50 could be rediscussed, not to be taken out or revoked, but to define more detailedly the provisions needed in order to one country to leave the Union. So maybe it's enough for a Brazilian to talk about European issues. This is